Standing in a forest like this one, made up of oak trees, birches and elms, it'd be pretty easy to think I'm in a park or the botanical gardens. Obviously, scenery like this doesn't exist anywhere around home. I'm very happy to say I'm in southern Sweden, where this beautiful Scandinavian forest is home to big game species, such as wild boar, roe deer, red deer, fallow deer and moose. This is my first ever hunting trip to Europe, and the hunting traditions here, combined with their game management, is on a level we just don't experience back home. Now, we've got a huge trip planned for multiple species, but I can assure you, this first hunt is going to set the bar pretty damn high. It's mid-October and the fallow deer are just about to start rutting. So if you're like me and you like big bucks grunting and a whole lot of palm, then I reckon this one's just for you. This hunt kicked off near the town of Malmo, where we met a buddy of mine, Erik Jeppson, who would be hosting us on his local grounds and guiding us throughout the hunt. I first met Erik 2 years back when he and his mates from Sweden came out to hunt here, and I helped them host their film Aimpoint Hunts the Globe 3. We sure had a great time hunting sambar in Victoria and big game up in the Northern Territory. It was during that trip that he told me about the awesome fallow hunting he had back home, so naturally I was keen to get over as soon as I could. Erik is the Director of Marketing and Sales for Aimpoint, a company that lives and breathes hunting and shooting. We started off at the factory in Malmo, where they have a world-class indoor shooting range built into a specialised tunnel under the factory. The target area featured fully adjustable illumination, and each hit was digitally recorded and displayed on a screen beside me. It's extremely accurate, and it's the same method used in Olympic competition shooting. We got straight to the task of zeroing the sight, and it only took a few shots before it was hitting exactly where I wanted. Then we were ready to get out for a look. The rifle for this trip was a Tikka T3X in 308, and an exciting aspect of this stalk was that we'd be taking the brand new Aimpoint Red Dot Acro on its first ever hunt. This amazing little sight sure punches above its weight, and I was keen to give it a run. We put the jet lag behind us and headed straight for the forest, and it sure was a nice change from the hustle and bustle of airports to be straight into the cool and peaceful Swedish forest with soft soil under our feet. The aim of this first stalk was just to have a look around, see what was moving and get a feel for the area. The rut was also close, so we were interested to see if the bucks were with the does or still running separately, and as luck would have it, we spotted a giant straight away.
We're literally only a few hours from getting off the plane. One thing I like about Erik, it's straight down to business. We're not stuffing around and we're into it. Now, I don't know if we've struck gold straight away or it's a sign of things to come, but we've just seen a monster fallow down there. I'm still trying to process how much antler we saw in under the beautiful forest. They've moved away. We're trying to get a better stalk in and around it. And I think I've actually died and gone to stalking heaven. Have a look at this.
Sure was a different experience from any previous fallow hunting I'd done back home, either on the mainland or over in Tasmania. The forest was just so quiet and the visibility was amazing. As always though, this works both ways, so we had to be very careful, and in the distance we saw a few does disappear. Deeper into the pines, the forest got notably darker and wetter, but there was still plenty of sign around, and Erik explained how the deer often bed in these darker areas of cover. With the wind right, we circled around to come back in to where we'd caught a glimpse of the large buck earlier, but there was nothing to be seen. We then came out on the edge of the field, and positioned against the tree line was one of a few tree stands that frequent the area. This was the first proper one I'd seen, as we hardly use them back home in Australia, so I was keen to check it out.
Pretty awesome view from up here. Understand why they utilise these high seats so much. There's quite a few around this field actually. Another one over there, another one down there. but I do like Erik's style, where he said he gets bored. Plenty of time for high seats later in this hunt. Even though the focus today and this afternoon's fallow, you can't ignore that. Look at the size of that European boar wallow. I'd be really keen to catch up with some of these guys. You can see on the trees around here where they've rubbed all their mud off. Very keen to see my first Euro boar.
Unfortunately for now, we'd have to leave the forest and the quick scouting trip behind, as our next adventure was scheduled to get underway first thing in the morning. Our journey to Sweden sure was going to be quite the hunting trip. Not only were we stalking for fallow, but we'd also been lucky enough to score an invite to share a trip with other members of the hunting media and journalists from around the globe to take part in some driven hunts for ground game, pheasants and ducks. We'd also be heading over to an island out off the coast and joining in with the locals for a rare opportunity to take part in an exciting hunt for their abundant population of hares. We'll catch up with all that action later in the series, as it sure was something pretty special. After the few days of fun and excitement away on the driven hunt, we again teamed up with Erik and headed back into the tranquility of the forest to resume our hunt for a big fallow buck.
We're back into it after a few days off. We had that amazing taste of Swedish fallow hunting a few days ago, but we've been away for a driven hunt with the other journalists from around the world at Aim Point. Fantastic experience, but it's great to be back in the forest and back on the hunt for a big fallow. The rut is progressing rapidly, day by day. In only sort of 10-12 days, I think the season will close as it comes into the official croak or the grunt or the rut of the fallow. So we're hoping that maybe over the next day or so, or maybe even today, we might hear the bucks vocalising, and that's going to be really important for us tracking down a big guy in this forest. Early morning, we've got a clear day. It's quite warm though, which might shut the bucks down. But straight into it up here to start checking these fields, see what's out early.
It was magic watching the sun pull out the colours of autumn, and a pretty special feeling to be back in the quiet forest, which was a big change of pace from the fast action of the driven hunts with the other journalists. Nothing was out on the fields early, so we changed tactics and headed back into the cover to stalk the forest. The process here was to go as slow as possible, listening and looking for marks on the ground, as well as looking ahead into the shadows, trying to spot them before they spotted us. We also took time to pause and wait it out in the silence.
Just listening. So quiet and insulated in this forest. Just hoping we can hear a buck start grunting.
With everything all quiet, we started to move on and soon found fallow, but this young doe certainly wasn't what we were after. Ahead in the next gully, we scored and picked up a lone wild boar heading back into cover. This was my first ever encounter with a Euro boar, and he looked awesome. Lucky for him, wild boar were protected on this property, so for now he was safe and he wandered off unawares, and we stayed focused on a buck. With so much open forest to cover, it was a continual process of thoroughly glassing ahead, and with a perfect breeze to stalk into, it was a joy observing the comings and goings of the Swedish wildlife.
We just did a really solid slow stalk in there, Erik. Spotted a few fallow mobbed up in there. He rightly said, it's just a lot of patience to glass through and pick them out. We'd been looking at maybe a dozen deer for about the last half an hour or 40 minutes. And the wind got us. There's some pigs in here actually, some boar, that was pretty cool. They smelt us. And then the wind kicked around and got to those fallow. They all took off, and sure enough, bedded right in the sticks was a big buck. Here's one we're after.
We kept stalking throughout the morning, working every opportunity we could, but it sure was proving tricky with the open forest, and nearly every time we spotted them, they spotted us as well. We did find another 2 good bucks that were challenging each other, but the does busted us, and again we were caught out. As it neared midday, we figured it was time for a move.
As we came around the edge of these fields, we actually spotted a really good buck out where we'd had a look a couple of days ago, actually. He's holding a huge group of hinds or does, which Erik says is a good sign that he's the big dominant buck, because over here they just don't get to hold does when they're small. Problem is we bumped into about 50 deer. One rise before we stalked around and get a look at him. Just gotta wait this one out, I think.
Eventually the deer grazed further away from us and we could safely make a move. The plan now was to try and come in from the forest behind where we'd seen the giant buck out on the edge of the field. If everything went right, we'd be in place sitting in the cover before dark, with the wind right, looking out over the area he was last seen. As we got down to the edge, fallow could be seen feeding out everywhere, but not one mature buck, and with so many does, we knew there just had to be a big guy nearby. We waited and waited until the fading light eventually beat us and we had to head back across the field. In a parting note, just on last light, when it was too dark to film and we could only just barely see through our binos, the big buck appeared in the distance, standing out on the edge of the field, seemingly proud and almost gloating. He'd clearly won this round, but we now knew where he was, and one thing was for certain, we'd be back early tomorrow morning to battle it out with him again. Next day we were away before dawn, and on the drive up to the hunting grounds we spotted movement and Erik immediately pulled over. Out in the field, 2 foxes were coming back from a night's hunting. In this area they are the enemy of farmers and gamekeepers. I managed to get the pair and they sure were a step up in condition and body size compared to the ones from back home.
Off to a busy start this morning, heading out to look for fallow, and saw a couple of foxes from the car. A bit of very quick predator control. Let's go and check out. This is a big fluffy fox.
Bit of a cooler start this morning compared to the last couple of days. And we've spent the morning, as the lights come up, just out on the edge of the fields, listening, looking. A couple of younger bucks were just having a little squeak, a bit of stuff around, but we have heard a big guy kick in. So our plan is to work through the forest and try and get in on him. The only problem is over here, there's just a lot of deer to get through. But it sounds cool, hearing this big guy go. Finally got through all these does. I found a buck. It's a beautiful example of an up-and-coming Swedish buck. But he's still too small for what we're chasing. I'm not sure on that age. It might be 2 or 3 or 4, maybe. It's pretty scary what they can get when they get older. We're chasing that 8-year-old model. Bit of a split palm in his right. Good sneaky spot to hide here in the dark forest. that. Big, deep buck.
The grunting of the buck was exactly what we'd been hoping for, and down below us in a bowl there seemed to be deer everywhere, fueled on by a rutting frenzy. Holding deeper in the cover of the pines, we'd see fleeting glimpses of at least 2 giant bucks that were fighting for dominance over the stand. There were also smaller satellite stags trying to get in, as well as multiple does. So exciting as it was a nightmare to try and single out an animal and go for a clear shot. We had to move around to get the wind right and began to slide in to try and get a better view and hopefully a clear lane. Hours passed and multiple times I almost had a shot, but typical of rutting bucks, they hardly ever stand still.
I got timber all the way through.
The 2 dominant sized bucks finally reappeared down in front of us, paralleling each other in a rolling standoff. This was my chance, but as soon as I got the rifle up, they turned back into the cover of the pines. Out of nowhere, they suddenly got spooked and started to break out across a small gully, so I got ready. I anxiously pleaded for them to stop. They started to slow and I spotted the big guy running second, but he paused and was now covered by oaks. They took off again, but frustratingly cleared the ridge and disappeared for good.
Man, that's so disappointing. But quite funny at the same time. We were set on those bucks for, what is it, 3 hours nearly?
3 hours. Yeah,
And
3
they're
hours.
just starting to get up. There was a beautiful selection of bucks to choose from if we were lucky enough, and then something spooked them. They barreled out to the right and left. We had the wind perfect, but some mushroomers have busted our stalk. So explain what happens with the land here.
On the land, even if it's private land, anybody can walk on it to pick mushrooms or berries.
Yeah, right.
So that means you can never stop them, you can never say anything to them, and they just walk through the forest. And right now it's mushroom time, as you know.
Yeah.
So everybody's in the forest, and we were unlucky again.
Oh, very unlucky. 2 big bucks coming up this side here. Beautiful big bucks. But yeah. Oh well, not to be. Anyway, that's the price you pay with free range hunting, isn't it?
It is.
With that part of the forest well and truly blown, we moved to another area that Erik knew well. And again, we got onto another cracker buck, but luck just wasn't going our way. Creeping in and closing the final gap, another animal blew our stalk and he bolted. We stayed on him until evening, but then as the sun began to set, the buck disappeared into thin air.
Today's just going to be one of those days where you lose a lot.
There was no doubting this was fantastic stalking on quality animals, but it sure wasn't easy. Was cold and crisp and perfect for stalking. We figured our best chance was to head straight back to where all the action was the previous day, and we weren't disappointed.
Back into what we call the raw pit, grunt pit. It's just full of big stags going on. We got, there's a doe looking straight at me now. We got 2 big dominant bucks going here. 2 we saw yesterday are still at it. One's actually bedded about 60 metres in front of us, but he's surrounded by deers and eyes. We're going to play it, make a play for him, creep down here on our bellies about 20 metres, stand up, try and shoot him. Should be easy.
Yeah.
As we crept to the edge and looked down, the booming sound of the buck gave me goosebumps. He was now working a roughly circular beat below me, disappearing and reappearing every 10 minutes or so. There were multiple other bucks and does all around us, and the wind was starting to swirl. It could be over at any minute, so I decided to roll the dice and go all in. Greg would hang back on the camera, and I would slide in solo to close the gap as much as I could. And the next time he presented, I was going to stand up and try and thread a shot through the pines before the deer spooked.
It's hit hard. He's down.
So much in hunting comes down to luck, and while yesterday we didn't have any, today we'd created a bit of our own. And this time at least, the plan had worked, and I'd succeeded in taking the dominant buck holding the stand.
Wow.
Closing in and finally seeing him up close, I was in awe of his size and had nothing but respect for such a challenging adversary.
The forest has finally fallen quiet. It's been non-stop. I'm really lost for words. I've never seen anything like this in Australia before, the grunting action and the quality of the bucks. I really am lost for words, mate. But we've got ourselves a cracker.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I told you before, it's a hard place to get into.
Yeah.
There's a lot of eyes looking at us.
I know, it's so frustrating sitting there with, 2 or 3 bucks maybe that you want to shoot but you can't, and they're just moving around. You can't get close enough. They're just in the pines. But fascinating to see the caliber of buck that's getting around here. And this guy was holding the ground yesterday as well.
Yeah.
There has been sort of 2 others floating around here, but they're all the same age bracket. But you're telling me that the big guys like this of this age and this level of hierarchy in the herd, they're the only ones that grunt.
Yeah, he will be the one that grunts, really deep and solid,
Yeah.
So he's holding this area.
He
We
sure
saw the
was,
old
yeah.
one that is a little bit out on the outskirts now.
Yeah, right. You reckon he's past his prime, maybe?
Yeah, he's past his prime. He's a little bit shorter in the horns. He has more thickness, but he is just not getting into him,
Yeah,
because he has
yeah.
the strength now in the body.
Yeah, so he's in his absolute prime. And what age would you put him at?
Put him at 8, 9, something like that.
Right, yeah.
Something like that.
See the coronets right down on the bases. It's just so good to see deer getting this old and this mature. What a fantastic hunt. Well, thanks for all your help and your hospitality. The Aim Point Acro has done beautifully well.
Because it's first deer.
Yeah, right. Well, there you go.
You are the first one.
It's an honour. Well, thanks, mate. This has been an incredible experience, and I look forward to the next stage of our hunts, getting on the driven boar,
Yep, tomorrow.
deer and ducks, just in the nick of time.